Thank you so much. We're going to call this meeting to order. It is 7:09 on May 25, 2023, and this is a public meeting of the City of Portland Police Accountability Commission Subcommittee on Transition Plan. If the Spanish language interpreters, Lizette and Adriana, can please give the information on Spanish language interpretation, that would be wonderful.
Esta es una junta pública sujeta a las leyes estatales de Oregón y las reglas administrativas de la ciudad de Portland y será grabada. Habrá interpretación disponible al español para poder escuchar en español. Por favor de oprimir el icono de globo. Luego interpretación y seleccione español. ES entre paréntesis. Continuará viendo la junta pero escuchará al intérprete. Por favor denos un minuto en lo que se habilita esta función.
Thank you so very much. The city also offers ASL interpretation, which is being provided by Christine and Mary. Please pin their video feed to see their interpretation throughout the meeting. The closed captioning is turned on in Zoom as another means of assistance, but please note this is an automatic captioning service and it is not always accurate. The city supports access to meetings of the Police Accountability Commission and can provide other language support as well. Please email in advance of future public meetings, either as a response to public meeting notice or directly to policeaccountability@portlandoregon.gov to ask for other access assistance, including interpretation into other languages. This meeting is a public meeting subject to City of Portland Administrative Code and Oregon state law and is being recorded. For this meeting, the chat function is enabled for commission members to communicate with each other. Members of the public will be able to ask questions using Zoom's Q&A feature. As the commissioners are presenting and or discussing things, if attendees have questions, please feel free to submit them through the Q&A. We hope to use this feature to help guide our conversation during the meeting and future meeting agendas topics. We'd like to be clear that not all questions will be answered during the meeting, but if answered, both the question and the answer will be visible to you and will become part of the meeting record. To access this feature, just click on the Q&A icon in the middle of your screen. I'd now like to turn the meeting over to our co-chairs for the land acknowledgement.
Thank you, Dr. Moses.
Welcome in.
Thank you. My name is Faith Aiken. I'm one of the co-chairs along with Catherine McDowell, the subcommittee, and would like to take a moment for our land acknowledgement. The PAC uses the land acknowledgement on display at City Hall. We acknowledge that the rivers, lakes, streams, and lands of the lower Willamette River rest upon the occupied territories of the Multnomah, Wasco, Cowlitz, Cathlamet, Clackamas, Chinook, Tualatin, Kalapuya, Malala, and many other tribes. We recognize the many villages, traditions, cultures, and relationships that existed along the river since time immemorial. We recognize these tribes stewarded these lands and rivers since time immemorial for future generations. We recognize and undertake responsibility for the destruction of the river and land, of traditional food sources, sacred places, and multifaceted ways of life. We acknowledge the economic and social values that enabled the harm to the river, including systemic racism, classism, and other systems of oppression that perpetuated harm against Black, Indigenous, and immigrant communities along the river. With this acknowledgement, we commit to honoring and learning from the past and working towards a more equitable and sustainable future for the lower Willamette River. We commit to seeking solutions that acknowledge the inequities of past socioeconomic policies, and the harm done to people and our relationships to these lands and waters.
Thank you so very much. Next up is our community agreements. I would like us to read our community agreements to ourselves. There's 3 slides, and then on the last slide, I'll ask if we all commit to the community agreements for today's meeting. So let's go ahead and read part 1. Next slide, please. Thank you. Next slide, please. If you notice that a conversation is coming close to violating a community agreement, please call your fellow commission members in gently and with compassion. If you are called in, please take a moment to consider how you can best participate in this space while still respecting the community agreements and making space for everyone. Do we all commit to following the community agreements for today's meeting and to gently calling in our colleagues and collaborators if needed? Love to see jazz hands or thumbs up or something. Thank you so much. Now I'm going to pass the timeline back over to the co-chairs.
Okay, well, good evening, everyone. I'm Catherine McDowell, is she, her pronouns, and one of the co-chairs of this subcommittee. And we have basically laid out a work plan with 6 phases of work, and we are now in the 5th phase, the transition phase. And this subcommittee is charged with doing the transition plan, coming up with the transition plan. We will work until the end of August, August 31st, 2023, and present our proposals to the City Council for consideration and approval. So this chart is designed to let folks know where we are in the transition and broader system phase based on the agenda and scope approved by the Commission. Now that the PAC has developed a rough draft of what the new system will look like, in this phase we'll develop a transition plan for how we get from here to there, and an understanding of that, of how the process for implementing the new system will change or interact with other police systems and levels of government. And we'll also name the new oversight board and bureau. So this slide that we're looking at right now is the current project plan for the transition plan and the broader system of phase of the Police Accountability Commission's work. The slide is for everyone to see where we're at, and the purple bordered green box under the late May column is where we're at. So we're the subcommittee on the transition plan. This is our 2nd meeting, and we are basically in the work phase of that. So following today, here are the upcoming meetings of the Police Accountability Commission. I'd like to highlight that our next, that the other subcommittee, the subcommittee on broader systems, meets next Tuesday, May 30th, and we have a full commission meeting next Thursday, June 1st. We also have an informational session on June 7th to explain the draft of the new system and get feedback from the community on it. So today's meeting, it's, as I said, the second meeting of our subcommittee. We'll start by having members frame what they want to see out of a transition plan. So kind of a policy scoping decision, or excuse me, discussion. And then we'll have drafting groups from our last meeting report back on the work they've conducted so far and some of the proposals and ideas coming out of that work. After that, we'll have a discussion and figure out how we want to start memorializing our work into a transition plan, which is the document coming out of this committee. And then, of course, as always, we'll ask for a public comment on anything related to the subcommittee's work plan. So with that, I'll turn it back over to Dr. Moses. Thank you.
Thank you, Co-Chair Catherine. Next on our agenda is a discussion about the principles you want to see in the transition plan. This is a big picture framing conversation. The discussion is a round robin, so it's designed to have all members speak once and provide their ideas and thoughts on both questions. Excuse me. Each member has up to 2 minutes, and I'll be calling on members to speak. After everyone's spoken, we can move on. Please feel free to pass if you need more time to think, and I can come back around to you. So that is where we are. Thank you for, we can stop sharing, yes. And so the question is, what principles do you want to see in the transition plan?
Facilitator, Dr. Moses, I see staff has their hand raised.
Very good. Thank you.
Yeah, we subsequent to sort of preparing for this, co-chairs had a different way of framing this question, which might be sort of more helpful. What are the broad goals of the transition plan document, and what are pitfalls that you would like to avoid through this process is another way of framing the question. Thanks.
Thank you so much, staff. Broad goals or pitfalls? All right, I am going to start with Commissioner Lovisa. Any thoughts around broad goals or pitfalls?
Sure. I almost was like, I feel like I need like maybe 2 minutes to like write out my thoughts just in response to this question. But
Sure.
I think
you can take the time.
yeah. So I'm like, but I did kind of think, I was like, of course, whenever we are talking about I guess principles, like it brings me back to like our values document, and think like principles or ideas of like equity and anti-racism and things that we had kind of talked about as a group towards the beginning of this process. Yeah, thank you so much for the share. So that might be kind of a good jumping off point a little bit for some parts of this discussion, but I'll have some more thoughts in a minute. Just give me a second to write some notes. Thank you.
Let's take a minute to do that. And thank you, staff, for going through the values. This is very helpful. Okay. Yes, last panel. All right. Well, I would like to go to co-chair Catherine. If you would like to start us off here. Broad goals, pitfalls, values.
But yeah, well, I will say that I appreciate taking the moment to look back at our values, because I think that it, as I was thinking about this transition plan, I mean, what's been top of mind to me is that a year is ultimately a pretty short amount of time to basically build a new system, to appoint the board, to hire the director, and to hire the staff, and be ready to take cases. So, my focus has been on, how do we do that efficiently and effectively so that it's a smooth transition, so we actually accomplish the goal of being ready to take cases at the end of that 12-month transition period. So I've been focused pretty heavily on I think maybe almost in a defensive way about, we've already heard from people in the city council that, oh, how can that be done? Or how will you do that? Or, just sort of skeptical that we could build this new system as quickly as we need to under the settlement agreement and the terms of the measure. But I think looking back at the value statement also made me think that it's really important for the community that we do this seamlessly and effectively, so that people don't get caught up in like a gap between the systems, between the old system and the new system, that the transition is seamless, that people don't get deterred from pursuing their rights because we have a new system that people don't understand how to use. So that's what's top of mind to me is, being, thinking about efficiency and effectiveness, but then doing that in a way that balances the interests of, the core groups that we're seeking to serve here. Thank you.
Beautiful, thank you. Co-chair Faith.
Yeah, I think I was feeling similarly. As we near the end, I think a lot of the pushback and questions we're getting are around how feasible our plan is. And so I appreciated our value of community-centeredness, and I think, yeah, that's resonating with me as I've been making spreadsheets and focusing on the real practical parts of how do we get this done. I don't know that I have been paying attention to that as much as I'd like. So yeah, I appreciate the invitation to slow down a little bit, and particularly as we are in the real nitty-gritty. And I think, we're getting to the point where the microscope is really focusing in on our work, that how do we let that microscope evaluate, but also really hold our commitment to anti-racism and community-centeredness.
Thank you, Co-Chair Faith. Commissioner Charlie. Welcome in.
Oh, okay. So I was actually reviewing the transition plan outline earlier, and I underlined a bunch of words because it's concerning to me. And from our values, that trustworthiness that's going to be so incredibly challenging to create from community, that you know, I live with. All those sayings that in one part of this where it's like where we hang out, where we live with, where we play with, where we worship with, where our neighbors are, who I'm related to. Trust is the farthest thing from their hearts and minds right now, this policing system that we're trying to create, this accountability system. And I guess some of the things I read in this outline that I'm wondering, are we doing this? It says, we will replace and fundamentally change how police oversight is conducted in the city of Portland. A transition plan required to switch from the current system, to overhaul police accountability system. What else does it say? It says, so many things in here I feel like we're getting pushback on to make a really what's the word I'm looking for is just a radical change that truly serves the communities that have been affected by over-policing, police violence, and deadly force. So that's always on my mind, and that's always on my heart. And it's always from the voices I hear in communities. So this transition, I'm just hoping we put people in there that truly do embrace those things. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much, Commissioner Charlie. Commissioner Ajay.
Yeah, so I keep thinking about just how some of the responses have been to what we've presented thus far. And having studied racial movements, after every movement, there's always this period of what is colloquially known as whitelash, when first, people in privilege kind of see what's going on and start to feel bad. Like, this isn't the kind of place that I want to live in. This isn't the kind of country I want to have. And so, they are for the social changes. But then once they start to see something that makes them feel a little bit uncomfortable, the status quo is slightly rocked, then the people that were opposed to the changes in the first place always swoop right in, with messaging to try and convince them that this was all a big mistake and that they actually like their comfort zone. They don't want a new society where everyone is included, because then they would miss out. So I'm saying all this to say that I think it's really important that we make a statement about how the time for arguing the politics of this is over, that the voters have spoken, and that anybody who is not willing or able to implement the will of the voters has no place in politics, to be honest. Yeah, and I feel like a desire to kind of not necessarily forcefully, but in some kind of way address the act of sabotage that's happening. A statement about how people voted for this for a reason. 2020 happened for a reason, and there has never been accountability. And people will never believe there will be accountability unless this succeeds. So, if they want to, gain more respect and bridge community police relations or whatever, then they have an obligation to work towards the success of this. Because if they sabotage it, as Charlie said, that's it for people. Like, people already do not trust the police. They do not trust the oversight process. And if this fails, that's it. The people are lost forever. And it's just going to be the people against the police forever. So, those that want to see the relationships improve need to do their part in helping this succeed and helping us implement this. Just my
Thank
thought.
you. Thank you so much, Commissioner Ajay. Commissioner Dan?
Good evening, everyone. Dan Handelman. I use he, him pronouns. I'm a member of the commission, and we had a work group. Three of us had a work group where we did the outline for what the training will be like. And so at the top of that document, we put these word here. The goal is to prepare the board members to function as a city body, hold hearings and appeals, impose discipline as appropriate, and recommend policy. So that's one goal. We did not include staff in there, even though we did mention training for staff. So, but you know, we weren't really thinking as big picture as you all are when you ask this question. So make sure that we don't forget that. We want to make sure the staff is trained properly too. And we actually wrote suggestion the transition subcommittee should look at the values and goals before we submit the plan. So we're in the process of doing that, but we should probably loop back again when we have our document ready to give to the rest of the commission. I think so. I think some of the pitfalls, is kind of hinted at by Commissioner Amechi, is that we have no control over some of the decisions that are going to be made once this thing leaves our hands, and that's always been the case. So we just have to come up with a plan that is palatable to us and our fellow community members that we're trying to represent here, but that we think will not get dismantled by the powers that be. Instead of putting into effect what was voted on. Today, by the way, for those of you who weren't aware, is the third anniversary of George Floyd's death. So it's kind of interesting that we get to meet on this particular day.
Thank you.
Yeah. So the other goal that I would like to add, just based on what I heard Commissioner Aiken say, or Co-Chair Aiken, is that we should think about very carefully about this gap that we're going to have between when we turn our proposal over to City Council and when the City Council is eventually going to vote on the actual code language, and use that time to the best as possible to help make that ramp up be as smooth as possible. And I want to just put in here a specific shout out to Commissioner Lloyd for her idea that was proposed last time about having a transition staff person, that a project manager. So I think that's something that I really want us to examine as we're having this discussion tonight. Thanks.
Thank you so much. Commissioner Tim.
Yes, thanks. Tim Pitts, I use he, him pronouns. I definitely hear Commissioner Ajay and Commissioner Charlie and some others like with anxiety about sort of the transition. And I guess I've had a lot of anxiety about other portions of this, but the transition plan I'm pretty excited about because I feel like 12 months is a doable timeline if we're organized and we understand the steps that need to happen. And so I'm pretty excited about fine tuning all of the steps that do need to happen and having a good understanding so that we can put something out there that is logical and reasonable and would work. And that hopefully our friends at City Council will have an easier time saying yes to than maybe some other things, because it does seem like, the nuts and bolts. But then also at the same time, there are some opportunities to really, and so it's really great to look at the values again, and then to think like, okay, which of these, which values are going to be reflected the most strongly in the transition plan. And it really makes me think about the people piece of this. And so not to lose sight of the fact that, for one, lots of people that currently work at IPR and other organizations maybe will not have jobs at some point in the future as a result of this action. And so keeping that in mind, that these are people that are impacted, and then keeping in mind the ability that the hiring for the new organization has the ability to have an extreme focus on equity and inclusion, and that we have the opportunity to prescribe, as I understand part of the transition plan, maybe some of these goals or ways that, the hiring is supposed to work, how they're supposed to reach out to different communities. So I just think we should really think about, how we can infuse some of these values that we think are the most important into seemingly mundane details that you think is putting all on a flow chart or a project plan, but there's great opportunity in a lot of those places. So, and pitfalls would just be, I think, timing of things and not understanding how long things are going to take, and then having it not work on any type of reasonable timeline. So
Thank you so much. Thank you so much, Commissioner Tim. Commissioner Lavisa, 30 seconds.
Okay, I'll be brief. So many wonderful ideas. Yeah, I just kind of I'll try to keep it brief. You know, I was thinking about well-being of the people involved in this process. You know, this is an enormous amount of change, and it's just going to be kind of an inherently stressful time for everyone involved, both the people transitioning out and the people transitioning in. And so I think clarity, a lot of clarity will be helpful on who is supposed to do what job, and leadership, you know, who is bottom lining a lot of these things, will help, because you know we do have kind of this really tough situation where we're having a lot of transitions and we're also having onboarding happening, and if there's, you know, a lot of ambiguity there, that's really just a situation that's like ripe for a lot of stress for everybody involved. So I think maybe just trying to remember to keep it humane, trying to keep this process as humane as we possibly can for all the humans involved. And I think that means like making sure people have everything that they need to do their jobs, making sure that people's workloads are humane the entire way through as the transition is happening, and making sure that people are connected and don't feel siloed and don't feel like they have to figure all of this out alone, because you know we'll all be figuring this out, or they'll all be figuring this out. So hopefully that this can be you know, a team effort as well.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Lavisa. Thank you, everyone, for your beautiful ideas and the deep thoughtfulness that is going into this. Next on our agenda is to hear from the different drafting groups. Co-chairs, can you remind us who was in what drafting group?
Yes, we can do that.
Thank you.
Drafting groups. Well, let's go through the list. The first group was around the timeline, which was myself and Catherine. I know my co-chair circulated some materials this afternoon. The second drafting group is around the transition for IPR. And I believe that's Tim, who it'd be wonderful if Tim had a coworker on that, as it's not a small item, just what's going to happen with IPR. The third group is board membership and how we're going to stagger that, and that's myself and Tim. The fourth group is training, which was Charlie, Dan, and Cherie. And the fifth group is data transfer, which is Lavisa and Angie. And then the sixth group is miscellany, which is currently unassigned.
Very good. Let's start with timeline.
Sure.
Thank you.
That's me and Catherine. So Catherine and I met to discuss the timeline, which I think actually is a pretty good framing conversation for, you know, all of our work kind of fits it within the timeline of the 12 months. So staff, would you be able to share screen around the spreadsheet flow chart timeline that Catherine and I developed?
Yes, just a moment.
Thank you.
And also staff was very nice in putting this, the subcommittees, the work groups in chat, so we know who is doing what. So thank you.
Thank you so much.
All right.
Okay, Catherine, I'm gonna take the first go at this and then let you plug in.
Sounds good.
So the first part in blue is September 2023 to June-ish. This is a question mark. And these are the components that are really set outside of the scope of this group. So we will present our work to City Council at the end of August. Council has 60 days to propose any amendments in the settlement agreement. After that 60-day period, the DOJ and the US court have time to review council proposed agreements to the settlement agreement. That we do not know, that is not a set time. 6 to 7 months is a real estimate of how long it could take. After that, council approves the final text of the settlement agreement amendments. They have 3 weeks to do that. And then following, council votes on the PAC recommendations into code changes, and they have 21 days to do that. So those are all pieces that are set in stone outside of the transition plan that we're talking about in the subcommittee. So the subsequent components of the timeline are kind of the meat. Those two things are the same. Sorry, I'm reading here. Oh, thanks, Dan. I see what you're saying. They are belong at the same time. It's not an additional 21 days. Thank you. So these are the pieces. I'm going to read the first left-hand column and then the right-hand column. So the part that staff is highlighting now, those are kind of the blocks that we need to decide the time, like the sequencing and the timing. So the oversight board officially exists, and from that official start date at the end of the 21 days, we then have, or the new board has a 1-year transition period. Within that 1-year transition period, council will appoint its first oversight board members. The oversight board hires the first director. Oh, these are our recommendations, so we'll talk about that in a second. Then the director will hire additional staff. At the end of the year, at the end of the 1-year transition period, IPR will no longer be taking new complaints, and they will go to the new board. So it's important to note that IPR can be taking complaints up until day 365. And then on 366, the new board would be taking complaints. And within that, IPR would be still having cases that they're reviewing up until day 365 that would then need to be transferred. So this is what Catherine and I discussed on the right-hand column, or just some sort of logistical pieces. I think Commissioner Dan mentioned Lavisa's suggestion around a chief transition officer, and kind of our recommended, or what we've brainstormed, is around a transition team. So potentially members of the PAC who would be interested in participating in that. So a subset of our group, and then potentially members of CRC who are not interested in joining or applying to be on the new board. And hopefully some CSD staff who would be able to support the transition team. And I think that the training kind of subgroup of our subcommittee would like to discuss how CRC members could support potential training. So our initial recommendation, mostly out of feasibility, is for council to appoint the first 11 board members. Those 11 board members would work with the transition team to hire the director and implement the transition plan. They would oversee the hiring process and work with the transition team to recruit the additional 22 board members. In the hiring plan, the director would prioritize hiring folks who do intake and investigators, so that the work would be ready to begin on day 366. Folks like policy analysts and data analysts while essential, maybe don't need to be there on day one. So, Catherine, please fill in.
Yeah, well, thank you for going through that, because I think you covered most of it. I just want to say that, we ultimately need a transition plan. And I think what we thought was if we started to put a timeline together that had key milestones, then we could, with those key milestones, and we could just start taking the suggestions from the other work groups and fitting them into within those key milestones. But, the obvious milestones that we've already been talking about and thinking about are how do we get the first board members, or how do we get board members in place quickly so that they can hire the director, so that the director can hire the staff. And those are the critical path items. The director is the person who hires the staff, I think, under the model we have. And so we need a director to be able to staff up the new board, the new oversight agency. We need board members in place to be able to hire that director. So I think rather than, I guess, we talked about the, how long, just in the experience of this commission, how long it took to both appoint the initial board members, get us trained and ready, and get our staff person in place. I mean, that is not, unless you're really on it, I think that could take, could eat up a fair amount of our 12 months. So we were really trying to figure out how do we do that expeditiously so we can get to the point where we're starting to staff up the agency. So our one way to do it, we talked about, was to basically start with a subset, instead of trying to recruit and train and onboard 33 people at once before we can start moving to hiring the director. We talked about basically maybe phasing in the board, potentially 11, 11, 11, and then just setting the quorum requirements that would, gradually ramp up as we ramp up to the full size of the board. We did, think a little bit about, could we use the time, the time period where the DOJ and the court are reviewing our recommendations. Could we use that time to get a jump on board recruitment so that when on the day that our 12-month transition period begins, we've got our board members ready and we can immediately begin the process of hiring a director? And we didn't go deep on that. I did explore it a little bit with staff who, had some concerns about whether that would be feasible, whether we really could get going on board recruitment before that 12-month period begins. So, I'm not sure that we're wedded to the tranching, but that was one way we were thinking to do it expeditiously. So with the idea that, our goal was to try to get at least the kind of a core group of board members on board so we could get our staff director hired as quickly as possible, hoping like we could do that maybe in a couple months. And so then that would give that person then 10 months to fill out the rest of the kind of key positions in the group. So that's the thought. And it looks like staff has a follow-up comment.
Staff?
Yeah, hi. Just wanted to clarify, in the interest of transparency, what I said to co-chairs was that I don't think it's possible to hire or to appoint board members when there are no qualifications written down as to what a board member would have to do, and the approval and selection process is not yet set in stone. And the date that happens is the date that the code package gets approved. And the date that the code package gets approved is day one of 365. So I just clear from a legal perspective, and happy to verify that with attorneys, especially after we have the outside legal counsel, which is hopefully coming soon in the next week or two. but we can clarify that. But I don't think that it's possible to appoint board members without the rules of appointment. And I don't think you get the rules of appointment for permanent board members until the code package is approved. Happy to verify that. Yeah.
Okay, thank you so much, staff, and thank you, co-chairs, for kicking off this section. We're now going to take a 10-minute break. And when we come back, the transition for IPR will be the next one that we hear from, and we're going to keep these really brief for report outs. So we're going to take a 10-minute break. We'll come back at 5 minutes after 8. Thank you so much. Thank you so much, co-chairs, for that hard work on the timeline and the framing. I'm now going to ask the team that worked on the transition plan for IPR to step in.
Yep, that is me. And staff, could you please show the document I sent in at the bottom? Yep, perfect. So like one of the co-chairs said earlier, I could definitely use some help on this section. So I just wrote up the very basics that I knew of, but there's obviously a lot more to spell out, which was really just that, you know, as my understanding beginning, you know, once the new oversight entity is in place, IPR won't accept new claims anymore. So spelling that out. And then, you know, really to me, the main thing is how they're, you know, as their work winds down, how they're going to figure out how to keep their organization going, but maybe with fewer people, if that's how it's going to work, if I'm understanding it correctly. And then also understanding that, you know, IPR staff might be interested in working as staff of the new entity. And we've talked about this and said that, you know, there's maybe a former police officer that's on IPR and they might not be eligible, but assuming that they meet other eligibility, I, you know, indicated here that my thought would be that they would get hiring preference in the new organization. But then if those people were to leave in a big group or something like that, then that could be hard. So just sort of figuring out that transition of like the people that would go from one to the other. But then as far as like IPR's process for shutting down their work, that I really don't have any idea what that looks like and didn't understand if that's really our charge or theirs to figure out, or what it looks like if we just say that the work stops and then they figure it out, or what. So look forward to help and insight on all of that.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Dan.
I just want to say I did offer to help Commissioner Pitts, so I'm happy to work on that with you.
Beautiful.
Yeah, that would be really awesome. I would love that. So thank you. Thank you.
Any more thoughts, comments, questions? Staff.
Yeah, so just wanted to clarify that I think some of this additional things that you mentioned, Commissioner Tim, are in the document we just looked at in terms of like the 180-day general wind down for a case. That is a general thing. There are some notes on that. And maybe as IPR briefs again, that might be helpful to sort of ask them as they are, what will change for them and what is their expected timeline or their anticipated timeline as they are no longer taking in new cases, because that will remove the intake portion of their work, which is significant. So yeah, just wanted to flag that. Thanks.
Thank you. Commissioner Dan.
Well, I thought we were presenting and then discussing, but just as a brief discussion point, what the settlement agreement says is that within 12 months, IPR will wind down. So it's not actually technically on day 366. It's sometime within that 365 days.
There's also a question in the Q&A that says, will the IPR director also have hiring preference? That's a question for your consideration. Anything else again, Commissioner Dan? Oh, no, okay. Very good. then we will continue on, and I would like to have the group on board members go ahead and present.
Hello, that's Faith and Tim, and I'm sorry we haven't had the chance to connect. I did about 5 minutes of brainstorming on this, and Tim wrote a beautiful section. So Tim, do you want to go over this beautiful section, and then we can look at my spreadsheet?
Yeah, thank you. Sure, that'd be great. So yeah, basically I just took a run at writing out how things would work with one idea for how the board would be appointed, and then, hadn't had the opportunity to connect with co-chair Faith, or, seeing her and the other co-chairs timeline. Obviously my stuff is like my brainstorm, and then theirs is their ideas for things. But really my thought was around the board did need to be almost fully appointed in order to hire a director, and how that would look. And then also how to stagger the terms of the appointees, since we want them to be equally, as far as I understand, 1-year terms, 2-year terms, and 3-year terms. So I just spelled out that basically we would look, open applications for board membership at, basically as close to day one as possible in the 12-month period. And that I assume there would be a staff person, one of this transition team people that would have a focus on recruiting board members and other staff, and that they would manage outreach to the community and the applications. And that my best guess initially was that for 1 month, the application is live, and then they see how many applicants they've got and what they can take to city council, and that then city council appoints some number of board members from this round, and that it continues in this fashion. And I don't know, like how this compares to us being appointed to this commission and what that process looks like. So I know that there's people that we can get better ideas for how this actually works and what the timeline is like, but that's sort of the starting point. And the city council has a certain defined time period within which to review the application, so that they don't just sit on it, and making sure that the process moves as quickly as it could. And then wrote something in there about addressing, I think there was concern about addressing how it would work with the current council, including the mayor, versus the new city council of 12 commissioners. So tried to address that. I think that is the gist of it.
Any questions? Oh, there's more.
Yeah, and then that's just the staggering of the term. So, my idea or proposal was just that if we had a batch of applicants that were all getting confirmed at one time, that we have some way to order them randomly or sequentially or something, and that then you do a 1-year term, a 2-year term, and a 3-year term, so that each group of people has some at each duration. I don't know how much that really matters in the big picture. The staggering is what's more important. And then just, saying that the board would hire the director, and then the director works with the recruiter to start recruiting staff. And that's where a lot of my questions come in, is just sort of how long things like that really take, how long it would take to recruit for a typical position within the city of Portland would be great to know from HR, so that we really have some good ideas for like, okay. And also understanding that it needs to be ready to go. So people need to be onboarded to a certain extent before the 12 months is up. So.
Thank you, Commissioner Tim. Staff.
We are going to be asking for HR to come in and talk. I will say that there are a lot of variables. Certainly a normal hiring process, whatever range that is, the director process is going to be a different process in some ways. So just the way that the board membership, the oversight staff document lays it out. So that might take a different amount of time. Not sure if that would be a higher or lower amount of time off the top, but yeah.
Thank you so much, staff. Any questions? Commissioner Dan?
Well, is Commissioner Aiken going to put in additional information? Because I do have some thoughts, but I wanted to know if there was any more information that we didn't get yet.
Yes. I made a flow chart. So if staff wouldn't mind sharing, it's, I think, on the first or second tab of that spreadsheet that you had previously shared. Okay. So Tim, even though we didn't connect, I think we're on the same page with the exception of, I think we had acknowledged this problem maybe in our previous meeting that for folks in the first year, like a 1-year term, that's just not enough lead up time. So my recommendation, or what I thought through, was that it could be the first round of the 33 could serve a 2-year term. So 11 would serve a 2-year term, 11 would serve a 3-year term, and 11 would serve a 4-year term. And then, so we would have, and these, we don't know if 2025 is our start date, that's an estimate, but, and then at the end of their 2-year term, they would potentially renew for 3 years. Everyone would just then become on the 3-year cadence. But that you would apply for a specific board seat. So that you would, or not necessarily a specific board seat, but if I was interested in joining the board, in my initial application, I would express, do I want to sign up for an initial 2, 3, or 4 years? That way we could assign people and then replace people within that cadence. So I think that's as far as I got. So I don't think that there's, that's the only change from sort of Tim's written material. And then I think we would probably need, I don't know, I got stuck on the alternate seats. So I would love groupthink around how we, if the alternate seats would also be like a 2-year, 3-year, 4-year term, or if they would just be a alternate seat.
Any comments about that? No. Commissioner Tim?
Oh, sorry, no. Thank you.
No. Okay. All right, so I heard, Faith, that you're proposing 2-year terms, 3-year terms, and 4-year terms instead of 1, 2, and 3. Very good. Thank you for that. Commissioner Dan?
Okay, so I do like that idea very much. That does solve the problem of people who might have had a 1-year term and then have to leave the board before they hear their first case. I really like the idea of having people write down their preference of which kind of term they want. I think that should be part of the application to help it. I think, though, that randomly deciding who's going to be on each 1/3 is not going to be equitable. So I think that, you know, part of the consideration has to be whether it's making up the diversity that we've described in our what we want to see the board have, you know, how we want it to reflect the community. So I think that should be more deliberate than random about who gets the 1, 2, and 3-year terms. And broadly, I mean, this is, you know, this idea has kind of been hinted at, but I just want to put in a pitch for what I said before. And I guess I kind of feel like we need to get some kind of legal guidance on this, and I don't want us to get in trouble for having discussion about something that involves volunteers and staff people, but I think we need to have this discussion. So I would really like to see the idea put forward of creating some kind of transition project manager who would get hired, but perhaps even before we're done with what we're doing, to help guide the entire process from the time that we're done until the board's up and running, and then some. And that all 33 people would be picked out of a pool of applicants who would, you know, City Council could theoretically make a resolution at the same time they're passing the code, you know, their proposed changes on to the DOJ that says, we know for a fact that we're going to have a new oversight board and we need to recruit members for it. And we know, broadly speaking, this is what their job is, because that's what it says in the city charter. And then they could start recruiting and get the pool. And so the staff used the term appoint before the code's written. I would not advocate for that at all. I would say that they should have all the applications ready. And then once the code gets voted on, that within 2 weeks after that, if any adjustments have to be made to people that preliminarily were screened to be on the board because of the final version, then use those 2 weeks to fix that up, and then appoint the board members 2 weeks after the code is voted on. That would be my proposal to get this thing moving a lot faster. So thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Dan. Commissioner Catherine.
So I just wanted to clarify, Dan, are you saying that you think if we did that, we could get all 33 on board at once and not work to kind of get an initial tranche and then ramp up?
Yeah, I mean, so really, I think the dynamics of what would happen is if you have 1/3 of the board, which then has, as you pointed out in one of your documents, has a quorum of only 6 people, starting to make decisions about what's the RFP going to look like for the director and who's the director going to be, without having the other 22 people there to help make those decisions, it's going to create a terrible dynamic. So I really think it's important to put all 33 members on the board at the same time.
Thank you, Commissioner Dan. Commissioner Tim.
I guess just a comment, and I'll be brief, but really just echoing what Commissioner Dan said there, because we didn't get feedback on the timeline, and I love the start of the timeline 100%. But the only thing that scared me was seeing that 11 people, which means 6 people appointed by maybe just 3 people on city council. The ability for 3 individuals on city council to appoint the board, which is how it would work as I understand things, and then that they would only have to appoint 11 and that you would only need 6 of those 11 to hire the director for this whole organization, just really scares me that things could get off the rails. And somehow I feel like there is safety in numbers is maybe not the right thing to say, but somehow having the requirement that at least close to 33 people are deciding who the director is decreases the odds of it getting tilted in a direction that we definitely don't want it to go.
Thank you, Commissioner Tim. Any other thoughts? Feedback? Commissioner Lavisa.
Sure. Well, I'm not sure if this is the right time to talk about this. Are we discussing like all of the, it's an okay time to discuss the previous things that have been presented on?
I think so. They're all, they all kind of bleed into each other. So.
Okay. Okay. Yeah, no, I think just going back to yeah, Catherine and Faith's presentation, I definitely hear you on the idea of a transition team that involves maybe members of this commission, maybe people from CRC. I think that we have like a lot of dedicated and passionate sort of experts in these topics whose expertise we're really going to want to draw from. And also I felt a little concerned only on the idea of the transition team, because everyone who I was hearing you mention is a volunteer, I think. And so I guess I was wondering, I was like, was the idea of the transition team, is it an all volunteer team as you had conceived it? Or were you thinking that these were jobs that you were going to, that we would hire people to do, that someone would hire these people to do?
Thank you, Commissioner Lavisa. Commissioner Catherine, Co-Chair Catherine.
Yeah, so I mean, without a ton of thought, I think we're just thinking the transition team would be some combination of volunteers and CSD staff so basically the CSD staff who have worked on this or have, have familiarity with it. It just, at least I'll just speak for myself, that it made sense that to employ them in the transition if possible, as well as volunteers from this commission and from CRC. So that was kind of the thought, without it like understanding where that how we would like make a proposal for a budget to fund that, and how many people it would be. We hadn't gone further than that, but I think the idea is it would be there would be staff, and I think, at least in my mind, it would make sense to have the staff drawn from CSD staff who have supported our work to date.
Thank you, co-chair. Any other questions at this point? Commissioner Lavisa?
Well, okay, and so then I wanted to ask Commissioner Handelman, were you suggesting that if it's possible and it's legal and we can find a way to do it, or suggest that someone do it, or however this would work, that we hire somebody basically now, or pretty soon, to kind of begin, like professionally begin managing the transition, essentially?
Yes, Commissioner Dan.
Yes, I actually wrote my own version of the timeline. I don't know if it's appropriate to share it now or not, but I do want to get to our outline that we worked on in our work group. But the idea I had was that start in July, start doing the outreach to hire the transition person, to have them in place by the end of August. And I know that's not necessarily realistic with the way that the city moves so slowly, but we still have to propose the idea, right? I just also want to say I'm 100% behind having the team also include members of this commission who do not want to be on the board, and members of the CRC who do not want to be on the board. I think that would be a fantastic way to support that project manager that you, Commissioner Lloyd, described. I think that would be great. And I describe it as a project manager, not CSD, because I feel like there's a lot of people in the community who, even though, I understand we've been had this pushback before, but CSD is seen as and described as something that coordinates the work of the police bureau, the fire bureau, 911 center, and the emergency management folks. So I think it's perceived as a law enforcement agency in itself. So while it may be true that some of the people who are in there know a lot about what we're working on, it might be good to have this position be like kind of an independent contractor position that is doing, leading the city through this transition. Thanks.
Thank you, Commissioner Dan. Commissioner Co-Chair Catherine.
So just a quick follow-up to Commissioner Handelman. Where would that person be housed if not in CSD?
Go ahead, Dan.
Well, I believe that we have 2 more meetings. We got time to think about this.
Okay. All right. You don't have to have an answer. I just wondered if you had a thought about it.
Oh, I did not, I didn't get that far, but I do think, it's important for nobody at the city to be working without anybody supervising them. But I think we should think carefully about how we want to make this. So, we've been hearing a lot about the trust, that we have to build the trust in the community. If something goes wrong right from the outset, we could spoil the whole project. So I just want to be thoughtful and deliberate, and not just kind of fall back because they're easy.
Got it.
Staff, I saw that your hand was raised.
Yeah, I think it's important to ensure that people watch this, people will be watching this video, and it's important to ensure that the accurate information is given out. There may be folks who are not as familiar with the city's org chart. So I think it's important to clarify that the Community Safety Division does not coordinate, and it's important to not merely mention a false impression that people have, but also to correct it, that it does not coordinate the work of the PPB, and it does not report exclusively to the mayor's office, which is another thing that came up in the previous meeting. So just wanted to clarify that very, very clearly. It is a part of the Office of Management and Finance, completely independent from PPB, as well as fire, as well as 911, or the Bureau of Emergency Communications is the formal name of 911, and the Portland Bureau of Emergency Management. Certainly there's collaboration and conversations across all the different, parts of the city. That's just how it works, but it does not coordinate, and neither is in a hierarchical relationship with the other.
Thank you so much for that clarity, staff. I'd like to go to the training group. Who is working on that part?
Oh, did you say training?
Yes, I did.
Oh, that is myself and Commissioner Michelle Wesley and Commissioner Smith, who's not here this evening. I welcome Commissioner Michelle Wesley to chime in at any point as I'm making this presentation. We can't read every word because we're running out of time, but in general, the yellow part is stuff that we wrote in. The stuff that's not highlighted in yellow is stuff that came from other documents that we used as our charge to develop this. And I already read you the goals at the top. So then the onboarding process and training, we combined this section 1A and B about training organized by staff that's supposed to be delivered. So that, again, this is from the one of the documents from the last phase, and it said that there should be training organized by staff. There is no staff, so how is this going to be done? So we looked up online the videos that we got to be trained as members of this commission. That has to do with board member basics, ethics of public officials, and public meetings and public records, and then one by the Bureau of Human Resources, and the links are in there. Okay, next screen, please. And then, if necessary, the city attorney can deliver some of this generic training or question. We have a lot of questions. Is the PAC attorney going to still be on retainer after we turn in our proposal? Perhaps they can conduct the training, or potentially the auditor's attorney could be the right institutional person to do this training. So that's something to think about. Then section C is about training about the Portland Police Bureau, and we stumbled a lot on this one, but we said what it should include. Should not shy away from talking about lawsuits, histories of the police association, key events that have happened, policies, procedures, and training. And the question here is, who should deliver this? Civil rights attorneys, civil rights activists. Is there a role, we asked, for the police bureau or the police association to play? And if so, will it harm community trust in the new board? Question mark. Think about it. D, training about the oversight board and staff, including the history. The history should include the history of the Independent Police Review and the Citizen Review Committee and the Police Review Board, the current system, delivered by people involved in those entities. And I think maybe below we say preferably from community member participants of the PRB and not the police members. Something about the history of the ballot measure, and something about the history of the PAC, delivered by somebody from our group. All right, next screen, please. And then E is about training about the internal structure of the board. And most of that we're leaving up to the board, although that's something I do want to kind of talk about extemporaneously in response to my own proposal here. But I'll do that when we're done presenting. So a lot of this stuff won't exist, and we have some specific things that are in the documents we've already written, like that there will be 5 board members on the panels. That's the kind of thing that can be trained on, because that's what's going to be written. Stuff like that will be written into the code. And we want to make sure that the IPR, CRC, and PRB and PAC helps with this training too, and it doesn't recreate bad best practices. Item F, also from the last phase document, training about civilian oversight. I looked it up, and the National Association for Civilian Oversight of Law Enforcement, NACOLE, has a bunch of training videos at the link I put there, and it may be that IPR and a police review board can add to that. G is training about local history of over-policing, including geographically specific training. And we said training should be delivered by civil rights attorneys and maybe public defenders or civil rights activists, particularly from over-policed communities, BIMPOC, Black, Indigenous, mixed, and people of color, people with mental illness, addiction issues, houseless community, for example. Next screen, please. H is paperwork necessary to ensure access to city resources, including compensation. And a lot of that information that we got came from the Office of Management and Finance, could come from the Bureau of Human Resources in the interim before there's a staff that gives board-specific paperwork. Okay, so the second item that was discussed was peer training, so that the existing board members would train the new board members when they stagger on things, but there's no existing board members at the beginning. So this is what we wrote. A, appointees shall be assigned one or more current board members for peer training. So we wrote training should be done by members of the CRC and Police Review Board. New oversight board members should be allowed to review case files. This is very important. I talked about this last time. New oversight board members should be allowed to review case files in CRC appeals and PRB cases. Think about the findings they would come to in those cases and attend the hearings without interfering as part of their training about how to review complaints. That way they'll have a full understanding about how these cases work before they hear their first case. And we wrote preferably the community pool members of the PRB will conduct this and not the PPB. That's where that came. And B, the oversight board shall establish a list of responsibilities and topics to be covered. And some ideas that we brainstorm, we can add more, is how to review a case file, what are the meanings of the findings, how the discipline guide works, and procedural issues for hearings. And I think that's the end of the document. Is that right, staff? Oh, no, then we have a list of questions. Will people be paid to conduct these trainings? That was kind of Commissioner Lloyd's question before. Yeah, and I don't know. I mean, it seems that it'd be hard to pay CRC or PAC members to do things like this. So maybe some will be volunteer. Who decides how to spend the $12.3 million before the board and director is selected? I don't know. There's a non-interference clause in the charter. To what extent will a project manager assigned to the transition be able to coordinate or deliver these trainings? Does PAC want to recommend board members attend Citizens Academy or go on ride-alongs, which is what is required of PRB and CRC members now? And perhaps engage in the houseless emergent. I don't know. That's up for discussion. And the last thing is just a definition of who's on the Police Review Board.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Dan and Commissioner Charlie. Commissioner Charlie, go right ahead.
Yeah, so I don't know exactly because I haven't had to take a look at this civilian oversight of law enforcement, and then thinking about where this actually belongs in this whole transition of training. And as you know, I share often through my lived experience. And so I'm wondering where might trauma-informed training come into play and in hiring. Just some thoughts that I had. That's going to be so important.
That's one of the values.
For all 33 folks, right?
Yeah, so maybe staff can add that in there as a comment around, training should include or could include trauma-informed practices. Staff?
Was the intention to just put a note at the bottom for that, Commissioner Charlie, or would you prefer to have it be under one of the existing categories of delivered by staff? Or
well, we can decide that. So just maybe put it down at the bottom with the rest of the, like, where does this belong? To me, it belongs everywhere, but
Thank you. Anything else, Commissioner Charlie?
That's all for now.
Okay. Commissioner Dan, how would you like feedback for all of these questions?
Probably in the form of chocolate. No, in the form of chocolate. I said it was a joke.
Chocolate. Yes. Okay.
So I welcome feedback. I'd like to say my little extemporaneous thing that we didn't talk about among the three of us, which is I'm wondering whether we members of the PAC who spent 5 months developing our bylaws and voting regimen and goals and stuff like that might offer preliminary bylaws, goals, and community engagement ideas to the new board, so they have something to work with, so that when they're trying to decide how to hire the staff, they have something to work with, and then they can spend the rest of the time, once they have that out the door, once they have the RFP out the door, rewriting the bylaws to their heart's delight. So that's just something I'd like us to think about for our transition plan. And similarly, whether they should write up a very rough draft of what the director's RFP looks like to help make that process go faster. Whether we should provide something to them to make it so that their ramp up goes faster. All right, and then whatever questions or comments people have, I'm open to hearing them.
Thank you, Co-Chair Catherine.
Just to follow up on what you just said, Dan, are you saying that as one of the work products of this subcommittee, we would include draft bylaws and a draft RFP, or are you saying that as a part of the transition, that the transition team would put a draft together so that the new board would have something to work off of?
Well, my understanding is we're creating the transition plan right now, and so that phase 6, the final details, that's when we would do that. If we don't get to it, obviously the board won't be in place until for almost a year after we're done. But it would be great for us to be able to do it before we disband.
So you would potentially want put that in the garden plot for phase 6. Very good. I see nods. Commissioner Charlie.
If I recall, we were given examples of these when we first started out too. So I think that would, give them some idea of what we had in mind when we created this, so they don't have any question about it. Those goals and values are so very important and should continue to be.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Charlie. Commissioner Catherine, and then I want to move on to the data transfer group.
Okay, so I just had one more question for or comment on the training stuff, which is that I think it would be helpful to expressly put in somewhere in the training around handling confidential materials, just because that keeps coming up from the city council. So just making sure that we've got, especially given the fact that we're talking about potentially having new board members look at files and then track the CRC process. I think just making sure that board members are trained on confidentiality is going to be an important thing that we can point to. Thank you.
Thank you so very much. Great point. Now the group on data transfer.
Well, that is myself and Commissioner Angie, who I believe is not here tonight, and we have not had a chance to get together and talk about this. I've been away. All I have is sort of my preliminary list of, I'll be honest, I have a lot more questions and answers at this moment about files and records, so I'll just maybe go over some of those quickly and call on the resources of both the group and also some of our attendees, and invite you to, if you know some of these answers, maybe you could send them to me or to me and Angie in an email. That would be helpful. And we can find a way to get connected. My first set of questions were around like the implications of the existing records. What are the current uses of these records? What systems do they interact with? What databases are they housed in? And what would the implications of changing or shutting down or moving any of these systems be, just in terms of the data structure of everything in the city. Then a set of questions that are just sort of, I know Tim mentioned questions about, IPR shutting down their work, and what are these, just, to what extent is that our question to answer exactly. And I think Commissioner Dan had offered to help out maybe on some of those questions. So maybe Commissioner Dan can help on some of these as well. But just really basic questions. Of course, there will be some records that are located somewhere and they will have to go most likely somewhere else. I am assuming that all of these records are not digital. I'm assuming that there a combination of paper and digital records. In my experience, there usually are. So where and how are these records now housed? What privacy rules, policies, and laws apply to these records? Where and how will these records be housed in the future? This is something we've talked about. What will be the home of the board? Who is eligible to transport these records, or if it's data, to transfer data? What is the volume of the digital data? What's the volume of paper records? How and where will digital records be stored? And then timeline, what resources must be in place before the board could accept full end-to-end responsibility for the acceptance, creation, investigation, and maintenance of a file from beginning to end, if assuming that that is something that the board will do. Yeah, so those are some of my questions, and I think that possibly Commissioner Dan, possibly Amy Delgado might be some people who might have some of the answers to some of these questions.
So Commissioner Lavisa, do you would like them to email you?
Well,
via contact, or, yeah.
Yeah, I think, I mean, it's sort of just a question of time. I'm seeing that we're coming up against the clock in this meeting, and I think that we have other things possibly still to discuss. So,
Yeah.
thoughts?
Commissioner, Co-Chair Catherine.
So one thing I just want to mention, I think that staff is trying to set a briefing with IPR maybe at our next meeting. And so I was just thinking, as I'm listening to the questions, I'm thinking, that's a really good start for an outline of questions to be asking IPR in terms of, at least getting their thoughts on some of these transitional issues. I think both that's applicable to both the work that Tim is doing and the work that your work group is doing.
Great, thank you. And Commissioner Dan said to reach out to Commissioner Obi on data issues, also suggested reaching out to him. And so I think the next thing to move to is actually public comment, since we do not have a miscellaneous work group. So I would like to invite public comment, and specifically because there are people in the audience that may have some help, some knowledge to be able to help these groups, your groups, be able to do this work. So I would like to go ahead and go to public comment, and please raise your hand using the function in Zoom, and you will have 3 minutes to be able to speak, and please raise your hand. Do we have any participants who would like to participate in public comment? Yumi, raise your hand.
It is great, I think.
Very good. Excellent. Okay, I'm going to go with Yumi first and then with Debbie. Thank you so much.
All right, Yumi Delgado, he, him, Vice Chair CRC. Good to see you all again. I would just, not to put too fine a point on it, I know IPR and CRC are more than happy to brief. You do need to actually invite us to do so, though. So when you want that to happen, let us know. That being said, if there are any short questions I can answer, feel free to ask me. I'm happy to try and address those right now if there's something that would be helpful. I will raise, I guess, my impression of one of the things that has been on the minds of IPR and CRC, and also the mayor's office, and I think also COCO, and also the Mental Health Alliance, because I've met with all of those agencies in the last week or so. No one knows what's going on, right? And I think at this point, several people here expressed some concern about what happens in a year, what happens in 6 months. I think the wheels are starting to fall off now, and we are looking to the PAC to start making those decisions so that the rest of us can start to plan, at least around what we assume will be coming. Specifically, I will give you an example of something that I'm concerned about, which is, generally speaking, most ways that we currently interact with the Bureau involve an expectation that the officer knows what sort of discipline or what sort of system they will be judged by when they go out into the field today, right? So we recently had a new discipline guide. I think that went into effect, I want to say January of 2022. Right now, we are still querying cases predominantly from 2021. So roughly 2 years ago, maybe a year and a half ago, if we're lucky. And every time I go to a PRB, I have to consult with staff and find out which discipline guide we're using, because we have to retroactively use whatever was enforced on the day of the incident. So if you're going to instruct IPR to wind down intake as of July 1 of 2025, right? Or maybe even January 1 of 2026. The question then becomes, how long does IPR and CRC have to stay spun up in order to address those complaints? Usually an officer involved shooting, right, will, if we're lucky, take a year. Usually it's closer to 2 years. A complaint, I would have to check with the IPR on this, but a complaint can often take a year and a half to work its way through the system after the investigation, after going to a police review board, after exhausting the appeal process. You all talked about this in, I want to say, phase 4. So given that scenario, if we keep things as they are, realistically, does that mean that CRC and IPR need to stay spun up until, late 2026, early 2027? Right. And if that's the case, what safeguards are we going to have in place to make sure that all of CRC and all of IPR staff doesn't just go to the new board, right? Or if the new board is going to take that over, are you going to then be willing to apply an old standard of justice, an old standard of review, and an old discipline guide and an old procedural method to cases that you are hearing because you're bound by whatever was enforced in 2023 or 2024? So this is a big question. It is the existential question that has us worried right now. For me, it's just a matter of how much longer do I have to keep doing this in the old system? Clearly, I will not be part of the transition team in all likelihood, because I probably have to stay until the lights go out, and I'm okay with that. But for someone like Ross at IPR, or any of the investigators they're trying to hire, this is their livelihood. This is their life. This is, these are choices that they have to make. And we've already seen a lot of people leave. So I think the sooner that you can make that decision, the better. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Yumi. We really appreciate your expertise, and thank you for illuminating the important work that we're just getting started to doing. So really appreciate this. Thank you. Commissioner Debbie, you'll have 3 minutes.
Okay, thank you. Hi, Debbie Iona, one of your fellow commissioners, she, her. I just want to comment on a couple of things. One, I'm really interested in the discussion about recruiting and bringing on board 11 or the full 33 board members. And kind of, I like, it sounds like you maybe are headed towards trying to do the full 33 at once. I think I'm trying to put myself in the shoes of somebody in that second 22 group. And, you might sort of feel like there's a little bit of a division between the original 11 and the 22 that come on later, and maybe a little bit resentful that the 11 made some pretty big decisions that you weren't involved with. And so, if at all possible, I think it's better to bring everybody on, at once and have them. And also, kind of that whole bonding and we're all in it together and we're a unified group sort of feeling, I think will be promoted through doing it all at once. And then the second thing is, so this issue about the community safety division's relationship with the police bureau has come up before. And I know my impression, based on presentations I've heard from Director Myers, is that the division is sort of trying to make connections and helping all of the public safety bureaus work together. And so they are, in my mind, I don't know if I'm right, they're clearly connected with police, fire, everybody else. So I think it'd be really helpful, just like even a one-page written memo explaining what the Community Safety Division is. Are they under the supervision of any of our 5 elected officials? What's their relationship to the Portland Police Bureau? And so that we kind of have a sense, and I don't even know, like, is OMF part of the mayor's portfolio, or is it a freestanding thing? So I think it'd be helpful to get that information just to clear it up for us. Okay, that's all. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Commissioner Debbie, and staff will be glad to provide that memo. It is now time to pass it over to staff on next steps and further drafting.
Yeah, so thank you. And I think there's sort of 3 parts to this. One is the 5 of the 6 drafting groups that have been in operation and have members. One is just a note on the 6th group, the sort of miscellany group. And a 3rd note is on briefings. So co-chairs, if you could please correct me on this, but my understanding as it relates to drafting groups is that the miscellany one is essentially getting split up with the body camera portion being asked to Commissioners Lavisa and Angie to be something that because it's a data information kind of issue, to be something to look at. And then the OIR group contract, or I should say that the contract currently held by the OIR group to do external review would be something that would be rolled in from a timing perspective into the overall 1-year timeline. Is that a accurate reflection of your intent, co-chairs? See thumbs up. Okay.
Yeah, assuming Lavisa and is it Monica is working with you, Lavisa? I can't remember.
It's Angie.
Angie, I'm sorry, I've forgotten who your partner on that was. So we were just thinking that body cams, just from a transitional standpoint, is really a data transfer issue more than anything else. So that's why we, rather than have it be its own thing, we thought it would make sense for you to just address that along with other data transfer issues. So if that makes sense to you, we decided we would assign that to your group.
I would agree with that.
Great.
Yeah, and then for the remaining the 5 groups, it looks like 4 of them seem to have entered this meeting with sufficient capacity. And for that last one, it looks like there's both Commissioner Dan volunteering to assist Commissioner Tim, and then I believe there is another member of this subcommittee that hasn't yet gotten on anything. So we'll check in with them as well, just to get a little additional support there. And then there was conversations around briefings at the last meeting. And one of the things that Commissioner Co-Chair Faith had emailed out was a list of the potential briefers, some of which were not going to do a briefing, but instead ask individual, 1 or 2 members to reach out to some of these folks that may be helpful to get information from, but maybe aren't going to be briefing in a public meeting and report back to the group. And so in particular, the jurisdictions that have recently implemented or gone through a transition, if there are members of this subcommittee or perhaps members of the fact-finding phases subcommittee on research who reached out to different groups and spoke to them and might be able to refresh that relationship and that information to get to hear back. And I think Chicago, Philadelphia, Baltimore were all a couple examples that had recently or are in the process of undergoing a transition and an implementation phase. And I see, thank you, Commissioner Dan, City of San Diego as well. If there are folks who may want to volunteer for that and to report back by the next meeting. And as a side note, the next meeting of this subcommittee is probably going to be in about 10-ish days, 11 or 12-ish days from now. So that's the rough timeline to kind of report back in not next week, but the week after. Because next week is the subcommittee on transit broader system on Tuesday, and then a full commission meeting on Thursday. Did I miss anything, co-chairs?
Commissioner Ajay.
I just wanted to register my interest.
great.
I wasn't necessarily part of the research phase, but I'm still interested in doing some of that research. So yeah, I can follow up offline.
Yeah, I'm
Good.
sorry if that came across as like only those members, not at all. I'm sure everybody welcomes anyone willing to contribute, and thank you.
Commissioner Dan.
So, well, we had a kind of a strange meeting tonight because the first document was presented and we didn't discuss it, and the other documents we sort of didn't have time to discuss all of them. So, for instance, the document that Commissioner Michelle Wesley and I worked on, we didn't get a whole lot of feedback on that. We got like 2 things that may be additional, but we had a whole bunch of questions that didn't get answered. How do we proceed?
Well, staff.
Can't answer that full question, but I can say there are a couple questions in there that maybe are able to be answered in a sort of factual way that I'd be happy to. These documents are likely to get kind of combined into a single updated version of the outline from last time. That's sort of the proto draft, and in there, happy to put staff notes and comments. For example, on like how there's a question about the money and when that's going to get released. Can't speak to who decides how to spend it. That's more of a member decision. But in terms of when would it be accessible, that might be helpful to know. And so it can add in that portion of it, and then maybe co-chairs can answer the other portion of it.
Thank you, staff. Co-chair Faith.
Yeah, I think as we develop the next agenda, a lot of it will be going through some of the details of these documents. And as staff has mentioned, perhaps putting them together. So maybe we can create a list. I'm happy to do this. I don't want to volunteer, Co-Chair Catherine, but co-chairs can develop a list around some of the questions that seem outstanding from these documents. So we could be prepared to address those at our next meeting for discussion.
Thank you, Co-Chair Faith. Commissioner Tim.
Yeah, sorry, basic question. Are we allowed to discuss and provide feedback and ask questions via email, or are we only supposed to do that in these public meetings? Because I had some comments on yours, Commissioner Handelman, and was excited to share them, but we didn't have time.
Staff.
It's not a clear yes or no answer to that question, Commissioner Tim. It has to do with public meetings law. It does not allow for serial communications, which means you can't sort of have an iterative back and forth conversation, but we are allowed to do something where we can send out a draft document and members can give their feedback individually and track changes and in comments. And then those are sent back individually and kind of we combined all the track changes into a single document, and that really saves time for the next meeting. But then the next meeting does have to determine whether or not to implement those changes in the public view. And that might be oversimplification, but I think it helps. And hopefully the deputy city attorney and the audience feel free to jump in if I was wrong on any of that. But yeah, thank you.
Thank you so much. So co-chairs, is that the process that you would like to have happen?
Yeah, I think that makes sense. People can offer feedback, but I think the point is it's got to be reflected as comments and not so we can then review it collectively at our next meeting. So I think that's I'm gathering that's the key point, that you can provide that feedback, but before decisions are made about it, how to incorporate that feedback, the group needs to have that discussion.
Beautiful. Okay, any other questions, process, otherwise? Very good, then I will go ahead and bring this meeting to a close. As a reminder, you can now submit advanced public comment to the Police Accountability Commission via web form, voicemail, or postal mail. Thank you all. Thank you to all of the members who attended today's meeting and for your contributions today. Thank you to our interpreters. And finally, thank you to the members of the community for attending and contributing your thoughts and questions. We deeply appreciate your participation. If you're not already signed up for email updates, please sign up to receive updates from the PAC. The next meeting of the subcommittee will be the week of June 5th through 9th. So I would like to adjourn this meeting at 9:05 p.m. Thank you.